Fellow Rotarians and guests, welcome to the Downtown Rotary Club meeting today, Monday, September 21st, and a very exciting meeting and program in order for us. I'd like to start by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to invite up President-elect Tony Knorr to say the invocation.
Good afternoon. Thank you, President Jason. Will you please bow your heads? Dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity to once again join together in fellowship. In a year that has presented adversity, uncertainty, and challenges, we are grateful for your unending love and grace. In the Declaration of Independence, our nation's founders stated that we are all created equal and that we are endowed by a creator with certain unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. Please continue to instill in us humility and ability to love our neighbors as ourselves and to hold in the highest regard the value of every life. Thank you for our speaker today, Judge Karen Schreier, and her work to shine a positive light on the progress we have made in regard to equality in voting and so many other aspects of our lives. Bless our time together. In your name we pray. Amen. Now we're going to go ahead and introduce a couple new Rotarians. First off, I'd ask Alex Ramirez to come forward and introduce Jeff Griffin.
Hello, fellow Rotarians. Today I'm here to introduce you to a guy. It's a very special guy who, when he actually came to us here in Sioux Falls, had to deal with pretty much one of the biggest challenges that we're dealing in our, I was gonna say in our city, but pretty much in the whole world, dealing with this coronavirus thing, you know, and coming into a new job, trying to promote new jobs and trying to better our city is not an easy task. And he did it. He went in, started the job. He hasn't stopped since. I think he even slept in his office sometimes. Not sure. Anyway, he is a good man, a good father, good family person. And I'd like to introduce you to Jeff Griffin. He'll tell you a little bit about himself.
All right. Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. It's very nice to be here. I've met so many of you already. Today is about, well, yesterday would be my 9-month anniversary of being the Chamber of Commerce president. So moved here with my wife, Rosie. Rosie and I will be married 25 years this December. We have 3 children. Our son, Max, is a second-year student at Xavier University in Cincinnati. Our son, Alex, is starting work at Showplace next Monday. He just graduated from high school last year in Illinois. And my daughter, Camilla, is a sophomore at Washington High School. And my wife, Rosie, just got a job at Washington High School. So Camilla was thrilled about that she'd have a parent on site. But we absolutely, Alex mentioned moving here to take on this job. Yeah, it's been a challenge, but all of the great things that I knew I was moving to have come to light. And we didn't need a pandemic to demonstrate those to me, but since we're living through that, we're doing it together. And it's had its challenges for sure, but this is such a solution-focused community. And Bobby Turry's here. She's our current chair, although she's reminding me, what hour is this? As of September 30th, she is past chair of the chamber. We changed those October 1st. But Bobby led the recruitment team. And when I showed up for my first interview, there were 13 names that were on that list, and there were 13 people in those seats for that interview. And that may not sound much to people, but it's very meaningful to have that level of folks interested and spending so much time that they did with me and my wife to make us feel comfortable and confident about moving to Sioux Falls. And we couldn't be happier about the move. We are really, really enjoying living here and got the family here and had a great amount of support. I've been running chambers of commerce for just over 10 years. I worked in Worcester, Ohio as a chamber president, Peoria, Illinois for 6 years as a chamber president, and now here. Prior to that, I worked about 16 years in juvenile corrections and nonprofit management. My bachelor's in criminology is from Ohio State University, and my master's in social work is from the University of Texas at Arlington. So I kind of went from social services into the business realm, but still nonprofit management. And, you know, of our 2,000 members, so many are non-for-profits and churches and schools and education plus business. So it all ties together. And the biggest part I like about a Chamber of Commerce is its members want to be part of something bigger than themselves. So not different than Rotary, but when I'm able to get a phone call and find a solution for a small business owner, that really means a lot. And that's what I like most about my career. So looking forward to being here many years. Thank you.
If you'll stay close, Jeff, we're going to take a picture after we're done here. And thank you. Great words from Jeff. Alex, thank you for bringing Jeff forward. And if there's ever a time where we need strong leadership at the chamber, it's in 2020, and we're really excited to have Jeff on board to carry on the legacy. We've had a great chamber. We'll continue to build on that, and Jeff's going to do a great job with that. Another person that we're excited to have in South Dakota and back in South Dakota is Stephen Williamson, and that's who I have the good fortune of introducing next. He's a native of Pierre, graduated from USD. He has worked in higher education the majority of his professional career at Augustana Luther College and most recently North Central College in Illinois. You may remember he was also the executive director at the State Theater for a period of 4 years. So has a wide breadth of experience, but we're excited to get him back. He currently serves as the foundation director at Southeast Technical College, where I have the fortune to serve alongside him. I'm part of that foundation board. So really excited to have Stephen with us back in Sioux Falls and here as part of Downtown Rotary. I would just ask Stephen to come forward to share a few thoughts about himself and his family. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I just want to say how honored I am to be on the same stage as Judge Schreier during this time, and it's an honor to be here. Again, my name is Stephen Williamson, originally from Pierre, graduate of the University of South Dakota with a degree in history and political science and a master's in history. My wife is Carrie, who's also originally of Pierre and is a hospitalist up at Sanford Health. Between the two of us, we have 3 children. My daughter Grace, who's a sophomore down at Colorado State. Well, she's in her 2nd year. I don't know if she's actually sophomore status yet. And our other son, Alex, who's a sophomore down at the University of South Dakota, and our son, Ben, who is working on a solar project after graduating from the School of Mines and Technology down in West Texas. Currently, I am the foundation director at Southeast Tech. Some of you might know my dad. My dad is Ron, originally from DeSmet, worked for Governor Janklow, was out at Citibank and things of that sort. My mom is from West Hartford, Connecticut, and is a classically trained pianist and also probably the best writer I've ever had the privilege to read any of her stuff. Southeast Tech has been here in Sioux Falls since 1968. It serves a vital purpose here in the great city of Sioux Falls, providing technicians, HVAC, plumbers, electricians, nurses. Southeast Tech was just recognized as providing the 2nd best LPN program in the Midwest among 660 schools. That's probably our largest degree field, is probably in the healthcare field, which is not surprising. When I actually like to call myself not director of the foundation, but director of access to higher education. It's not odd to say right now that probably access to higher education is probably more difficult now than it has been in quite some time. So my job is to find funds to help students who need them to go on and with the pursuit of higher education. And I take great, I not only enjoy that a lot, but take great honor in doing that. But the other thing is we also are working very hard at creating greater access for first generation and underrepresented populations. That is a big job right now, to recruit, matriculate, retain, and graduate students in some form of higher education, whether they're getting a certificate, which is to be a commercial driver's license, or they're going on for a doctorate in physics. Does not matter. We all know that the value of some kind of certification after high school is pretty vital if someone wants to be a part of the middle class and up. So I am ecstatic to be here. I'm glad to be back in Sioux Falls. As much as I did like Illinois, I'm glad not to be there right now. And I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank Tony and Jason for asking me to be a part of this, and look forward to seeing you all a lot more.
Yeah, Jeff and Steve, I want to thank you for joining the Rotary Club of Downtown Sioux Falls. We're thrilled to have you. If I could have you both come back up here along with your sponsors, and we'll take a quick picture. Jeff.
Okay, smile.
So we'll not social distance for a moment and take this picture.
All right.
Thank you. I'd like to now allow Tony Knorr to come back up and introduce our esteemed speaker today. We're thrilled to have Judge Karen Schreier. Tony.
Thank you again, Jason. Judge Karen Schreier is the first woman to be appointed to the Federal District Court as a court judge in South Dakota, a role that she has served in for over 21 years. She has presided over matters in Rapid City, Pierre, and Sioux Falls. She is also the first woman to serve as United States Attorney for the District of South Dakota. She's a native of Flandreau. Her and her husband, Tim Doherty, live right here in Sioux Falls. So following, if you're wondering why there's another chair, following her presentation, I'm going to be taking questions. Given the recent passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there may be some questions, and Judge Schreier is happy to answer questions on her presentation and any other questions that you might have. So we'll have time for that. But 2020 marks the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting most women in America the right to vote. To commemorate this milestone in women's history, Governor Kristi Noem appointed a Women's Vote Centennial Delegation to organize statewide celebrations, gather historical artifacts, develop educational materials about the suffrage movement, and more. And that more is presenting to you today at Downtown Rotary. So we're grateful for Judge Schreier. And I would just say, as we celebrate the life and legacy of another esteemed judge in our country, I'd ask that you join me in giving Judge Karen Schreier a very, very warm Downtown Rotary welcome. Thank you for being here, Judge Schreier.
And thank you for inviting me here today. First, I'd like you to think about the hardest thing that you've ever worked on where you needed someone else's approval to get it done. After 5 years, you'd presented all the information that you know about it. You've tried to persuade your supervisor, but the supervisor still keeps saying, no, you can't go ahead. So how do you feel? Exhausted? Ready to move on to something else? Ready to give up? Frustrated? Well, women in South Dakota worked for over 50 years and on 6 public statewide ballot campaigns to get the right to vote before it was finally added as an amendment to our state constitution. And I'd like to tell you their story. Before the Civil War, a few individuals began pushing for equal voting rights for women, but it wasn't until 1848 that the movement began to organize at the national level. In July of 1848, more than 300 people, mostly women, attended the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, New York. The convention was organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott, and it was attended by Frederick Douglass. A few years later, the Civil War happened, and during the Civil War, not very much was heard about the movement. The Civil War ended in 1865, and then in 1868, the National Women's Suffrage Association was formed by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, with the goal of securing an amendment to the United States Constitution in favor of women's suffrage, but it also opposed passage of the 15th Amendment that would give Black males the right to vote unless it also included female suffrage. At this time, South Dakota wasn't yet a state. It was still part of Dakota Territory, and our territorial capital was Yankton. The first suffrage-related bill in Dakota Territory was introduced in December of 1868. Newspaper reporters didn't take the measure very seriously, and it was defeated. Press reports speculated that the effort was aimed at either encouraging women to settle here in Dakota Territory or to expand the pool of people that were eligible to work in local government offices, because our territory was still really sparsely populated at that point. In 1879, a second attempt was made to pass women's suffrage. The bill passed in the Territorial Council, but then it failed in the House. The Yankton newspaper said that the bill's partial success was the surprise of a great many people of both sexes, because most had viewed it as just a huge joke. In 1885, Bismarck became the territorial capital, and another bill for equal suffrage was introduced. This time, suffragettes organized the southern part of Dakota Territory. Women filled the galleries of both the House chambers to observe the proceedings. And when the measure passed the House and the Council, the suffrage ladies rushed onto the floor and hugged the bill sponsor, John Pickler of Falkton, almost to death for the victory. Unfortunately, the recently appointed governor, Gilbert Pierce, vetoed it, and the news reverberated all around the country. In 1887, another bill was introduced, but it was defeated by indefinite postponement. Today, that would be a motion to defer until the 41st legislative day. When a bill was introduced in 1889 to allow women to vote in municipal elections only, the lawmakers allowed a woman to testify during the committee hearing. That was the first time a woman had ever been allowed to testify before a committee. And then the committee killed the bill. During this time period, conventions were taking place because they were talking about making South Dakota a state. So they were proposing a new constitution for South Dakota. The suffragists worked towards the goal of having women's voting rights embedded right in that initial constitution. And a leading proponent of this idea was Margaret Wiley Millett, the first lady of South Dakota. But even with her pushing, unfortunately, in 1889, the statehood convention did not include women's suffrage in the proposed state constitution, but they did direct the first state legislature to put suffrage on the first public ballot. South Dakota became a state on November 2nd of 1889, so the first public ballot was in November of 1890. This was the first time that all of the voters in South Dakota could vote on the suffrage issue. In October of 1889, suffragists held a convention in Huron. They organized the South Dakota Equal Suffrage Association, elected officers, and planned the start of campaign work. Emma DeVoe Smith took on the immense job of going out into the field to organize and promote the cause and organize local suffrage clubs. In her first county tours, she often traveled by wagon team, and she faced bad roads, bad winter weather, and even a wolf attack. She often spoke at rural schoolhouses and courthouses. One Sunday in Han County, a pastor canceled Sunday school and services to accommodate DeVoe because he fully believed that the cause that she advocated appealed so strongly to the noblest Christian sentiment of the church as to appropriately consider it on the Lord's Day. On the other hand, in Eagan, the local suffrage club president resigned rather than condone a suffrage event on a Sunday, and the Moody County commissioners denied DeVoe the use of the county courthouse. In May of 1890, Susan B. Anthony came to South Dakota to help with the campaign. She spoke at many locations, and she was the keynote speaker at an event in Wessington Springs, where banners were displayed with these slogans: taxation without representation is tyranny, equality before the law. In 37 states, the mother has no control of her child, and only idiots, paupers, criminals, insane, Chinese, and women cannot vote. The latter sentiment was not uncommon. Later that same month in Lead, DeVoe told audiences that she protested a system of government that places intelligent women on a level with idiots, lunatics, criminals, Indians, and minors. Susan B. Anthony and other national figures from the East traveled across South Dakota campaigning for women's suffrage. At one point, Anthony spoke under the cover of a lean-to canvas attached to the side of a sod church. Another time, she stood on a platform made from a barn door placed on top of boxes. She even attended the state fair that was held in Aberdeen that year and joined Governor Millett when they both advocated for women's suffrage. Most of South Dakota at this time, west of the Missouri River, was still part of the Great Sioux Indian Reservation. There were some non-Indian settlements, though, that were in the Black Hills. To get there, suffragists took a train across Nebraska and then traveled north to the Black Hills. They then traveled from Hot Springs to Spearfish, speaking in churches, homes, and halls. And when Susan B. Anthony was in one Black Hill settlement, all the town halls were already in use for variety shows, and none of the churches were finished yet. But the Presbyterian church was the farthest along, and they let Anthony speak there after putting boards across nail kegs to make seats. Throughout the spring of 1890, tensions grew between leaders of the suffrage campaign. There was both infighting among the South Dakota suffragettes and infighting between the national leaders and the South Dakota leaders. After a meeting in July in Huron, all the executive officers resigned and new state leadership was elected. The state leadership tried to get both the Democrat and the Republican state conventions to pass a resolution supporting women's suffrage, but they lost at both conventions. In the last month of the 1890 campaign, national speakers Henry Blackwell, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Ann Shaw toured the state extensively. Speakers had been to Aurora County so many times that the local suffrage association president wrote to the state organization and asked if Carrie Chapman Catt's visit could be postponed because they had just had 2 lectures within the last 2 weeks. Despite this huge statewide effort, when the vote happened, the suffrage amendment was badly defeated by 21,600 votes. In 1893, the Suffrage Association decided to seek a more incremental suffrage amendment, granting women the right to vote on school questions only. And this appeared on the ballot in November of 1894, but lost by over 5,000 votes. By 1895, the state association reported to the National Association that its membership had dwindled to 4 clubs and 35 members. The state association continued to press the legislature to put another amendment on the ballot, and finally, in 1897, they were successful. The issue was going to be on the ballot again in November of 1898. Local suffragists worked to reorganize their county associations, and they held several conventions. Some regional and national activists again came to the South Dakota to help on the campaign, but they lost the statewide vote. The South Dakota suffragists went to the state capitol every year to try to get it back on the ballot, but they were unsuccessful for 10 years until 1909. In 1909, a bill was introduced to grant suffrage to tax-paying women only if they owned property. It was defeated in the House, but late in the session, another bill was introduced to allow women to vote only once on the issue of prohibition. The bill was way far down on the calendar and it wasn't going to be heard. And then someone moved to amend the bill to grant full suffrage on all issues, and it passed so quickly that few even knew what had happened. Then it passed the Senate and it was on the 1910 ballot. Again, a statewide campaign started. This time, there was distinct distancing that occurred between the suffrage movement and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Fieldwork started again with speeches at conventions, churches, schools, fairs, theaters, and chautauquas. The Socialist Party of America sent speakers to promote suffrage in South Dakota. But by the spring and summer of 1910, more infighting plagued state leadership. After a state meeting, a new executive board and President Mamie Shields Pyle were elected. But alas, the 1910 Amendment Bill failed at the polls by over 22,000 votes. Pyle then took the lead in lobbying South Dakota lawmakers for suffrage. 1911 was the first time the legislature met in the new state capitol building in Pierre. Crowds filled the galleries for the debate in the House, but the bill was killed. In 1913, Pyle organized formal meetings with legislators in a committee room instead of trying to buttonhole unwilling men in the lobby. The Senate passed a suffrage bill by a wide majority. The House debated it for an hour and a half and then passed it, putting the issue on the November 1914 ballot. This was the 5th time it was on the ballot. Again, a statewide campaign was organized. Debates were held. The suffrage colors of purple, yellow, and white were everywhere, which is why I have on purple with a yellow mask today. National field organizer Antoinette Funk came to Huron to work with Mamie Pyle the week of the state fair. Hundreds of large yellow pennants were displayed everywhere. Visitors received ribbons and badges. Cattle and horses were even wearing the suffrage pennants during the livestock parade. Funk gave speeches daily and preferred to speak outside because when she spoke in courthouses, churches, and halls, the small audiences were made up of women and men who were already supportive. She wanted to reach the uninstructed voter, and she could catch him on the street. Several other national speakers also came to South Dakota that summer to be part of the campaign, but it was another disappointing election in 1914 when the amendment lost by over 12,000 votes. In 1915, Pyle decided to follow the example of Illinois and seek a bill giving women the right to vote in municipal elections only. This wouldn't need to be voted on a public ballot. The bill went to the House without committee recommendation. One newspaper reported that a lot of mere men in Pierre waited a long time for their evening meals yesterday, while their wives waited in the galleries of the House. It passed the House, but then it was defeated in the Senate. But a bill for full suffrage passed near the end of the session to go on the public ballot in 1916. This time, the League organized the state into county and township leagues in hope that every single household in South Dakota would be contacted by someone who is committed to suffrage. They used a flying squadron where teams of speakers traveled from city to city delivering packaged meetings and speeches. One member played her cornet on a street corner to draw a crowd to hear the speaker. They arranged for a parade of campfire girls and Boy Scouts to lead the crowd 3 blocks to a rally at a high school auditorium. They spoke to an audience at a movie theater during a 10-minute intermission between reels. They sponsored and put on 2 plays called How the Vote Was Won and Back of the Ballot. This time, though, the opponents were more organized and visible leading up to the election than they previously had been. They traveled the state speaking and appeared at the same picture show as the suffragettes. Opponents included Germans who were afraid that if women could vote, they'd prohibit drinking and the sale of alcohol. Other opponents were men who thought that a woman's role was to care for them and their children in the house. Some women opposed it because they didn't want their role in society to change. After the amendment failed in November of 1916 by over 5,000 votes, Mamie Pyle and others tried again during the 1917 legislative session. They kicked the campaign off with a reception at the St. Charles Hotel in Pierre. The ballroom was decorated in yellow and purple flowers. 500 guests attended what was described as the social event of the season after the inaugural ball. When the bill came up for debate, proponents and opponents filled the galleries. The bill passed both the House and the Senate to be on the November 1918 ballot. Before campaign work could really begin, though, the United States entered the First World War in the spring of 1917. From territorial days, immigrants who were here in South Dakota and filed their first papers declaring their intention to become United States citizens were eligible to vote. So they had not yet obtained citizenship, but just filed their first papers. In February of 1918, the State Council for Defense recommended that Governor Peter Norbeck work to change voter eligibility so that the new immigrants would no longer be able to vote until they had actually become a naturalized citizen, out of fear that the unnaturalized male residents of German descent would be able to undermine the government through the ballot. Governor Norbeck called Mamie Pyle in March and asked her to come to Pierre. When she arrived, he suggested amending the women's suffrage ballot measure to restrict alien voting as well, and she agreed. He called a special session of the legislature to vote on a new Amendment E that would define voters as full citizens regardless of sex. Many South Dakotans who would have actively joined in the campaign instead dedicated their time to the Red Cross and to women's committees for the Council of National Defense. Some meetings, picnics, and chautauquas were held, but World War I remained a priority. Any meetings or events had to comply with the local food rationing rules of the war. And over the summer, national organizers came to South Dakota and helped with local and regional meetings again. During the last month before the campaign, the Spanish flu epidemic hit South Dakota. As a result, the League had to focus on raising awareness on Amendment E through petition drives, circulars, and posters, but had to avoid any public meetings because they were forbidden. In November 1918, Amendment E passed with a majority of 19,716 votes. South Dakota became the 15th state to grant women the right to vote, and it was done before the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was adopted. Amendment E not only granted women the right to vote, but also granted women the right to hold public office and to run for public office. After the amendment was passed at the state capitol in January of 1919, 2 women were sworn in as a proofreader and a bill clerk in the House. In Aberdeen, several women who'd been clerks in the Brown County Courthouse were promoted to be deputy officers. After Amendment E was passed, some of the local franchise leagues disbanded, and others transitioned into educating new voters and to become the core for the League of Women Voters chapters. Meanwhile, the National American Women's Suffrage Association was trying to get Congress to pass an amendment that would grant women the right to vote nationally. The organization obtained a hearing before every single Congress from 1869 to 1919, 50 years. In 1915, the amendment was voted on in the House, and it lost 174 to 204. In 1918, President Wilson became a strong supporter of the cause. Legislation was introduced, and he gave a strong pro-suffrage speech right before the House voted. It passed a 2/3 vote with 1 extra vote to spare. When it went to the Senate, President Wilson again gave a strong speech. The vote was taken, but it was 2 votes short of a 2/3 amendment. In February 1919, they tried again, and it lost by 1 vote in the Senate. In June of 1919, President Wilson called Congress into a special session. And this time it passed with 42 extra votes, and it passed the Senate with 2 extra votes. When it was sent to the states for ratification, 3 states ratified it within 6 days: Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. In October, Governor Norbeck announced that he'd call a special session here in South Dakota to vote on ratification, but only if a sufficient number of legislators pledged to attend at their own expense. Pyle and the League of Women Voters worked by telegraph and telephone to try to get the pledges in time. Norbeck called the special session, and after the required reading of the amendment, a unanimous midnight vote at 12:44 a.m. on December 4th, 1919, made South Dakota the 21st state to ratify the 19th Amendment. And in August of 1920, Tennessee became the 36th and final state needed to amend the US Constitution. And it was first applied to the presidential election in November of 1920 when Warren Harding was elected. And now that you've heard how hard people worked in South Dakota for 50 years, from the end of the Civil War till the end of World War I, including 6 statewide ballot measures to get the right to vote for women, I hope that you will never forget to vote in the future in all elections. This year is the 100th anniversary of the adoption of the 19th Amendment, and I encourage you to go to the Her Vote, Her Voice website and learn more about women's pursuit of the right to vote in South Dakota. The website also gives you information about events that were held to celebrate the 100th anniversary, including a statewide virtual toast, a lighting ceremony at Mount Rushmore where the images of significant suffragists were displayed on the monument, a statewide virtual event on the day that women gained the right to vote, which was August 18th. And the website also has t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and other things for sale. Or you can sign up to be part of the Flying Squadron and host a virtual tea party, cocktail hour with your friends to celebrate women getting the right to vote and to help raise money for the South Dakota Historical Society so that they can continue to document suffrage stories and archive suffrage items. You can honor a special woman in your life, like your mom, your wife, your daughter, your friend, or a coworker with a $100 donation to the Historical Society, and their name will be placed on the honor wall. The Daughters of the American Revolution have porcelain dolls of First Lady Millette for sale to recognize her role in helping women obtain the right to vote. You can listen to the How Radical podcast series on Her Vote, Her Voice Facebook page. Or you can register new voters or volunteer to work at the polls. The women that I told you about fought for years to get the right to vote. I hope that you exercise your right to vote, encourage others to vote, and remember to celebrate the right to vote during this centennial year. And I'd like to thank Liz Almley of the South Dakota Historical Society for her research on women's suffrage movement in South Dakota. And much of her research is the basis for the information in this presentation. And also my law clerk, Hannah Moravik, who's right over here, has been operating the slides, and I wanted to thank her for doing that. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that anyone might have.
For those of you with questions, I can go ahead and take those. And Judge Schreier, if you want to go ahead and take a seat. I have a few questions if the audience doesn't, but I'll give you a chance to digest what you just heard, and would love to take any questions that you might have. All right, so you're the... All right, Michelle.
Okay, Judge, we gotta ask, are we gonna have a new Supreme Court justice before the election? What's your bet?
So because that is a political matter, I can't really comment on it. But I can talk a little bit about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When I first became a judge, one of the people that was in the U.S. Attorney's Office wrote to her and told her that I'd been confirmed and asked her if she would send me a note. So she sent me just a lovely letter congratulating me on becoming the first female district court judge here in South Dakota, and encouraged me to talk to her at the next meeting. As a new judge, all of the new judges come to Washington, D.C., and we get to meet in the Supreme Court building. And Justice Ginsburg came down, and I got to talk to her for the very first time at that event. Then last year, I hit my 20th year anniversary as a federal judge. And my law clerks wrote to her and told her that I was going to be at my 20th anniversary and asked her if she would send one of her jabots, her lace necklaces, for me to wear that day and then send back. And she sent one for me and said that I should keep it as a gift. So I just got that from her last year, and it's just really touching to me that I have that. And I can tell you I was extremely sad when I heard that she passed away. I think especially both as a woman lawyer and as a female judge, she's done so much for women to help women have equality. I read an article over the weekend that said that when she first started advocating on behalf of women, women were making 40% less than men for the same job. And now women make 20% less than men for the same job, according to these national statistics. But that's quite a huge advance, I think, over a fairly short period of time. We were talking earlier about Title IX, women having access to participate in sports in school. And it was adopted when I was a senior in high school. So before that, women were not able to play competitively any sports. And my senior year, Flandreau added track as the first sport that women could play. And it really changed everything from my perspective. I went out for track. You learned how to be part of a team. You learned how to lead. It made scholarships available at the college level if you were good in sports. And it just opened up a lot of doors that women didn't have before. So even during my lifetime, I've seen huge changes with regard to the role of women in society.
Question. Brianne.
Judge Schreier, thank you so much for sharing the history. It's really important, and it makes me feel so proud how far we've come. Something I just want to ask you about, and that was kind of not necessarily missing from the presentation, but needs to be noted, is that people of color, women of color, were not able to vote 100 years ago. And when I'm sharing this information on social media, being proud of the 100 years of suffrage, a lot of people in my circles don't feel included. And I'm just wondering what you have to say to that, and how this particular movement is helping bring people of color and those that had to wait longer to vote into the mix.
If I can repeat that quick for those that are with us. Thank you, Brianne. Great question. If I can summarize, while 100 years ago it opened up the ability for white females to vote, that didn't happen for other diverse populations. And his question or comment is, from that, then where did we go, and your perspective on the years that preceded that?
So in 1920, when the suffrage amendment was added, the impact it had was that white women were able to vote, but African American and Native American women were not able to vote. And particularly with regard to African American women, they didn't really get the right to vote until I think 1964, when the Equal Rights Amendment was, so the Voting Rights Act was amended to grant them the right to vote. And all I can say is that at this point, everyone has the right to vote. It's unfortunate that it didn't happen for everybody at the same time, but it's been staggered over time. But everyone at this point has it, they've achieved it, and they need to get out and vote.
Any other questions for Judge Schreier? We have a few minutes here. Judge Schreier, could you just share your story? So 21 years ago, you were named the first female federal judge here for the district in South Dakota. Maybe talk about your journey, what you've had to overcome. And then since you've been named, maybe talk about maybe others that have followed, or where do we still have room to improve?
South Dakota has granted 3 active federal judge positions. I'm the only female now and have been the only female during my time as an active federal district court judge. We also have 3 full-time magistrate positions, and we're at the point now where 2 of those are filled by women. The other role on the federal level that impacts lawyers is the role of the U.S. Attorney. And I served as U.S. Attorney before I became a federal judge. I'm still the only woman that's been confirmed, nominated and confirmed by the president to serve as U.S. Attorney in South Dakota. So women have made some inroads, but there are still more that need to be made. And I just encourage women. Oftentimes, I think women kind of sit back and they wait for somebody to ask them or encourage them to pursue a role that is a higher level role. And women need to encourage other women, but women also need to act independently on their own and pursue things that they think are important to them. And that's really the only way that women continue to make strides.
Great, and you've been a role model to so many women. One of the big initiatives, our one relevant for Rotary is around mentoring. Can you talk about what role that's played for those that came before you, and then how have you attempted to live that as opportunities have presented themselves for you to mentor others coming behind?
For me, when I first started practicing law, there was one female circuit court judge, and she was up in Aberdeen. So I never appeared before a female judge in my entire career. After I became a judge, I shouldn't say that. Judy Meyer Henry later became a judge, circuit court judge here in Sioux Falls. So I did appear before her, but I never appeared before a judge at the appellate level, either the South Dakota Supreme Court or the Circuit Court of Appeals. Judy Meyer Henry, for me, was a huge role model and mentor because she's like one of the few visions that I have of a woman as a judge. Since I've become a judge, I've really tried to mentor as many people as I can, both men and women. I always have 2 law clerks, and I view my role with them is to help them be better lawyers and help them be better citizens of our community. I really encourage them to be active in the community, to read the newspaper and the news regularly so that they know what's going on. And I typically try to hire people that I think either have a connection here to South Dakota or plan on staying here in South Dakota so that I can train our local lawyers to be better lawyers and advocates. I don't need to train people that are going to go off to Minneapolis or New York or Chicago. So I've really tried to help build up our bar association here in South Dakota.
Well, thank you for that work. Any other questions for Judge Schreier? In the back, Stephen.
A year ago, you and I had a conversation, and I said, and I've been gone for 4 years in Illinois, and I said, what's been the biggest change in the 4 years that I've been gone from South Dakota? And you said the role of drugs and mental health that's occurring now in the law system. How much more do you see that? Can you comment on that a little bit more?
All right, Stephen, thank you for the question. You just talked about the increase in drug and mental health challenges in the court system and asked Judge Schreier to comment on what she's seen over the last 5 to 7 years.
So when I first started as a judge, about maybe 20% of our caseload was drug related. And I would say now it's well over 50%. And I'm not talking about small quantities of drugs. I'm talking about pounds and kilos of drugs that are coming into our community. It used to be we had cases dealing with cocaine, and then it went to almost all methamphetamine for a while. The last 2 years, the methamphetamine is still there, but it's really added on fentanyl and heroin. And with regard to fentanyl and heroin, I see so many people that are overdosing, dying, or being brought back with Narcan. But I can't tell you the number of parents that I've seen come into my courtroom to talk about the loss of their child. And it is just heartbreaking to think about a 20-year-old, they're typically in their 20s, that overdosed and now they're gone. And I can't imagine from a parent's viewpoint how heart-wrenching that must be for them. So I'm not sure why we're seeing this huge increase in drugs, but it is definitely here. The other difference that I've noticed is the methamphetamine that we're seeing. It used to be about 30 to 40% pure. It is now 98 to 99% pure, which law enforcement would say that means it is coming directly from Mexico to South Dakota without any middlemen in between. And I think that that has caused a rise in violence associated with that really pure drug coming into our community. So the drug cases have changed dramatically. There's also a real lack of people that are having mental health issues being able to get the mental health care that they need. And I think people suffering from depression and other mental health issues are more likely to turn to either alcohol or drugs to try to be their coping mechanism. So if we could do something to address some of those mental health needs, I think that that would reduce the number of people that were using drugs, but it's all just a vicious cycle. And it's something that our community really needs to face.
Kadir.
Judge, thank you. We're talking about the mud drug. I was part of the crime prevention in Sioux Falls 20 years ago with Judge Lieberman and David Johnson and Mike Melstead and a couple others. They brought the issue of the mud coming to the city of Sioux Falls. We have to do something about it to educate the public about it and say it's there and going to be bigger. To be honest with you, they stopped us because reputation in Sioux Falls will be affected and not getting attention to the business moving to our city. What's your advice as a federal judge to advise those people? It's not just about reputation, it's about life of the young people in the city of Sioux Falls and the state of South Dakota. We have to educate ourselves about it. Because completely they shut us down to not talk about it because nobody for reputation of Sioux Falls to talk about money's coming in, which is very low at that time.
Thank you, Kadir. I think you were part of a task force a number of years ago to address some of the issues that Judge Schreier is speaking to now, and trying to balance education awareness with economic development and the vitality, and talking about the positive stories of Sioux Falls. So, any thoughts or comments around that, Judge Schreier?
So I think the drug problem is not going to go away by just ignoring it. I think education is a huge component for people to understand what the drug does so that they choose not to use the drug. And it really has to hit that age group between 15 and 30. That's where you see the largest percentage of people that are using drugs. But it needs to be hit head on, in my opinion.
Any other questions? So we got just a couple minutes here. I'm curious, we've all been living lives differently than we were prior to the middle of March. You talk about just your day-to-day presiding over cases in this environment. We've heard of things getting pushed back, and we've also heard of people that may have had a longer sentence that are now on the back end of their serving time have been let go. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what are the biggest things that you've seen in terms of change over the last 6-7 months?
So our life is really different than it used to be. I have two types of hearings that go on. One are short cause hearings, things like sentencings and changes of plea. It used to be all of those were done in person, and we could not do them by video. That has now changed. Congress authorized us to have our hearings by video. So for me, most of my defendants are in custody. So they're either at the state pen, they're at the county jail in Yankton, they're at the Minnehaha County Jail, they're at the county jail over in Lyons. They're spread all around this area, but they are there. The attorneys are typically sitting at home, and they all come up on a video screen for my sentencings and We're doing all of those short hearings by video. Trials are very different. It used to be the jury would sit in a jury box over here next to me, right next to each other. We now have the jury sitting out in the audience area of the courtroom, spread out 6 feet apart. We moved the witness box from the front of the courtroom clear to the back, so they're right back by the jury. We have plexiglass everywhere, and everyone wears a mask except the person who's testifying. Once they get into the plexiglass box, they can take their mask off so people can see their face when they're testifying. But everyone else, when they're asking questions, and me, wears a mask the entire time. So you almost feel like you're in a surreal environment, like something you would think you'd see on TV and in a movie, but that's how we're doing it. And even the jurors during deliberations, we've taken all of the tables and things out, and they are spread out around the perimeter of the jury room. So they're all 6 feet apart, and they wear a mask through deliberations. It's, we are pretty much back on track. We've worked through the people that we didn't see for a couple of months. But it's a very different experience. The law clerks are typically working from home now. We do everything remotely. So it's very strange.
Yeah, it'll change the way that things are done even after a potential vaccine. And we are going to be back here next week with Dr. Allison Suttle and Dr. Chad Turry representing Sanford and Avera. So we ask that you would join us for that, a conversation around exactly what Judge Schreier was just talking about. We've seen an increase in cases, increase in hospitalizations, and we think it's timely to have a conversation about what the real science is and what we're seeing in our systems. But before we talk about that, I do want to recognize Judge Schreier. She's a giant in our state, a role model for so many ladies and so many individuals, and I'm just so grateful for her to come here. As you saw, this wasn't something that they decided one session that they were going to bring forward. Hard fought progress that was made here. We got a lot of progress yet to make. So I would just ask that you join me in thanking Judge Schreier for being here with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Schreier. And so informative discussion. While you were talking, I had to look up a quote to get it right, but that quote is from Martin Luther King Jr., where he once said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend towards justice. And oftentimes it's too long. So the only way to shorten that arc is to be an active civic member and voter. So thanks again, Judge Schreier. As Tony just mentioned, September 28th, next week, Monday, we'll be back here in the Belvis Theater, where we'll be joined by Dr. Suttle and Dr. Turry from Avera Health. We will then be back at the Holiday Inn on October 5th, where we'll begin our election series. The first program will be Should Marijuana Be Legalized in South Dakota? No doubt to be an engaging conversation. Board members, we will be meeting on the 3rd floor in the boardroom here following this meeting. So I look forward to seeing all of you there. Fellow Rotarians and guests, thank you for joining us today. This meeting is now adjourned.